Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to share with you my day-to-day workflow with React Storybook. But first, I would like to introduce myself. So I'm Mary, and I'm a French developer working at Algolia. So Algolia is a search as a service provider, and basically, if you ever search for a package on the Yarn website, it's us under the hood. What I do there is I'm helping building our open source front-end libraries that helps developers building search interface. But if I'm here today, it's because I'm using React Storybook daily. And I want to show you how you can use it to design, develop, document, and debug your UI components. As you may be aware of, a UI component often relies on several states, whether it comes from their props or from their internal states. So I took these components. It looks pretty simple, right? Pagination components. But this component, it has a lot of props. There is a prop that will indicate if you want some button, like the show first or the show last button. And there are the props that indicate the current selected page, the total number of pages, and also the number of pages you want to display on the component. So, based on the combination of those props, you will expect a different design, right? For example, if you are at the first page, you will probably want to disable the first button on the left. Same thing, if you are at the last page, you will probably want to disable the show last and show next button. So what it means is that you have all those substates, and if you design your components in the middle of your complex application, it can become tricky. So that was the first issue. But the second one is, OK, we are done building our components. So now, what if in 6 months I forgot about what this props was supposed to do? Or even worse, your future coworkers or your current coworkers, they need a way to discover your components. You don't want them to dig into your complex application and discover by themselves all your UI components. So how do we make sure that our UI components are well documented? So here comes React Storybook. Basically, what React Storybook gives you, it's an isolated environment where you will be able to develop and design your components. You will not lose any efficiency because you still have out-while loading. This tool was released earlier last year by the Kadira team. And by the way, I thank those guys very much because they did a huge job with these tools. And now the project has more than 8,000 stars on GitHub. One thing I love about the React ecosystem is all the tools that provide to developers such a great experience. And to me, React Storybook is one of those tools. So what I want to talk about today is showing you how React Storybook will help you with all the stage of your developer journey. It's not only the develop and designing part of your work, but also the documenting part, the debugging part, and the discussion you will probably need to make about components. So to get started with React Storybook, it's fairly easy. You just need to download, if you have already your React application, you just need to run a single command line, get Storybook, and then you're ready to start developing. What you will get is this interface. It's basically divided into 3 parts, and the first part is the menu on the left, which has this stories kind, which is more or less your components, and then a list of stories, which are all the substates you can have of your components. You also got this space at the bottom, where you can find the action logger panel, but also every add-ons you will want to use. And lastly, but the most important part, the component view at the center. OK, enough talking. Let's make some code here. So here is our pagination component again. So basically, if you want to add a story, it's simple. You just need to create a new file, like I did here, and you add a new kind of story. Here it's pagination. I started by adding one story, which is the first page selected, that shows our pagination components with the first page selected. And now, if I'm modifying some code, like, for example, I don't like the blue color anymore, and I want some red color instead, So if I do that, you can see the modification quickly appearing. Of course, it also works with some JS code. So if I remove some button, for example, this one, the show previous one, you will see that the button disappeared. So this gives you an idea of what it means to develop with React Storybooks. That's already great. But you can do better. Actually, what we can do is express explicitly our actions. So if I'm looking back to my component declaration, you can see that there is this action which is called onClick. Here it's undefined right now, this function, but I can use the action function from Storybook, like, OK, this is a new action. I will call it onClick. And so now, if I'm clicking on my pagination component, I'm able to see it logged on the action logger panel. It's logged, but you can also have the parameters that are passed to the function. So obviously, here I'm clicking on the page 2, so I have the parameter 2. So that's one way to express your action. But we can do better again. What we can do is actually exposing our props in a way that every people, every user, every developer that will go to our storybook will be able to play with the props in order to discover the behavior of the components. So to do that, you can use the knobs add-on plugin, add-on. And let's say I want to expose the current page props. So I will say this props is a number, right, which is the current page. And the default value will be 1. So now if I'm looking at the knobs panels, you can see that the prop appear with the default value of 1. So now if I'm modifying these props and say I want the current page to be the third page, you can see that the component changed and it expresses a new substate. So once again, it's a great way to expose the behavior of your components and to allow their discovery. One thing you can also do is adding some automated documentation to your storybook. So to do that, you can use another add-on, which is a React Info add-on. And to illustrate it, I created a new story. As you can see, instead of using the add function on stories, I use the add with info function. And what this function allows me to do is to add some description. So here it's description. But what you get also is this little question mark at the top. And if you click on it, you will see that we get our description, right? But we also get the source of the story, so basically the declaration of the components, and all the prop types that you have on your components. So it's a great way to easily add automatic documentation. One last thing I want to show you right now is the fact that you can also link stories together in a way that you can show interaction between them. To do that, instead of saying, OK, my onClick is an action, I will use this function to say I will link the click to another story. So I will use the link to function. So here, I say I want to link the first story to the second one, which is the pagination, last page selected. And now, if I'm clicking somewhere on this component, I will be redirected to the second story. So basically, it's a way to show interaction. So you can easily see that with React Storybook, you can quickly develop. But one thing that is really great with React Storybook is that you are developing in isolation. What it means is that you need to think API first. Because you are not developing in the context of your application, you are forced to make your components reusable and generic. So that's a great thing. So now we build all of our stories. And basically what we did is that we build a documentation. And we call it a live documentation because it's based on code. Usually, when you have a documentation, you can find some code examples that are static and then can be outdated really quickly. Here you've got code, so it will follow your library, and it will be live. React Storybook is actually a great documentation from the outside. Because if you are browsing the storybook, you are able to discover all the styles and all the behavior of the components. But it's also a great documentation from the inside, because when you find a component that is interesting for you, if you want to know how you can use it, you just need to go to the source code of the stories and read how it is declared. One thing that Storybooks gives you is the ability to build it statically and deploy it everywhere you want, so externally or internally, but you can publish your storybook online. And I want to show you some real-life example about that. So the first one is the React.dat library from Airbnb. If you go to their GitHub repository, you can see that here there's a link, and if you click on it, you've got the storybook. So without even reading the documentation of this date picker, you're able to see how it looks like and what it does. You can also see that they're using the info add-on, and then you've got some extra information. So that's a great way to discover quickly a library. Second example I want to show you is our storybook at Algolia. It's basically now a part of our documentation. So here is our pagination component again. And as you can see, this is the page of the documentation. And you've got this link, which basically redirects you to the storybook. So what I want to show you here is the flexibility of Storybook. Because our widgets are meaningful in the context of a search, what I wanted for our user is a way for them to play with the search to see the effect on the components, and also to play with the component to see the effect on the search. So that's why you can see that around the component, you got this little frame with extra information. So here, if I'm playing with the search, you can see that the pagination component evolved. And same thing, if I'm playing here with the pagination component, you will see with a little bit delayed because of the network, this search appearing. I wanted also to expose the props of our component to let our developers play with them. So that's why I created a story which is called Playground, which is kind of special. And you can see here that you can play with the props. So you can remove some button, for example, to see what it means. But I will give you a meaningful example. Page padding, for example, may be a prop that is not that easy to get. So here, what you can do is just play with those. So let's say I want a maximum of pages of 10. And I will play with the page padding, and you will see what the effect it has on the components. So great way, again, to discover the behavior. I said that our documentation is live, and it's based on code. And as you know, code can break, right? So how do we make sure that our documentation will never break? Well, to do that, we need to add tests, right? So I think everybody knows that we should test our components, right? And for those that actually does some tests, what you end up is some test file with some declaration of components and then some assertion. But now you also have those stories that are also declaration of components. So in a way, you've got those duplication between the two. And I don't know you, but me, for example, I don't like that much duplication. So what if we could directly test our stories? So with Storybook, you've got two options. The first one is Storyshots, which is basically based on just snapshotting. And what it does is that once you download the library, it will snapshot automatically all of your stories. So this is great, because actually it comes for free. You wrote your story before, and now you've got the snapshots. And it's also great because snapshotting means that you get an image of the HTML rendering of your components. So it's a great layer to ensure that you do not make any regression, any unwanted regression. But to me, it was not enough. Because when a developer actually wrote a test, what he's writing is that he put some intent to it. When you write a test, you expect to have some behavior happenings, or you expect to have some business rule clearly expressed. And if you put enough effort doing those, you will end up having the specification of your application. It means that for a new developer coming into your code base, if he just read at your taste, he needs to be able to understand all the business rules that you have. And last year, when I was working on a presentation about how to test your React and Redux application, I basically discovered React Storybook. And almost immediately, I got this idea to test my components. So my first idea was fairly simple. It was, OK, let's just import my stories inside my test file, and I will test the stories. It works. But then people were asking me, yes, that's cool, but it would be better if we could have those test results directly inside the storybooks, because in the end, there are specifications. So I decided to create a little add-on for Storybook, which is called specs add-on or specifications add-on. And basically what it does is just that it lets you add some tests near to your stories in order to explicit the behavior that you want. So demo time again. So to add Storyshots to your storybook, it's super easy. You just need one test file, and you need two lines of code. Sorry. Once you've done that, just run your regular test command line, and you will see that it created for you the snapshot. So here I have 2 stories, and now I have 2 snapshots. So if I'm doing, again, some modification to my component by removing these parts, you will see that the snapshot is failing, the snapshot test is failing. And in a way, it's kind of funny, because now with Storybook, I'm doing some kind of Storybook-driven development along with test-driven development. Because I want to show you the specs add-on also. So to do that, we need to go back to our stories. So here, we will write a regular test. So don't need to read all the tests, but basically what it does is that it looks like for the first button, and it expects to have the action onClick called with the parameter 1. What I use here is enzyme plus expect, but basically you can use anything that runs into a browser. And here we will see the function, the mod with inside the storybook. But basically, it was made to run also with a regular test runner like Jest or Mocha. So if we go back to our storybook, now that we have had our test, you will be able to see them on this panel, which is called the specification panel. And if I modify the test, let's say I'm expecting to have the page 10, it will fail. So this way, you are able to see what's wrong when you are developing. Currently, it only works with a library that runs inside a browser, but thanks to this amazing community, we are currently working on a V2 that will hopefully let you write normal Jest tests and have all those results coming back into the storybook. So we have some fun, we have developed new components, we have documented them, but at some point, we will need to maintain them, right? That's OK, because you wrote all your stories. And so basically, what you've just created is a lot of small entry points where you will be able to go and to start debugging, because we know that to be efficient when debugging, we need to isolate the wrong behavior. And even if the stories that you currently have is not enough to illustrate the behavior that is not good, you can still enjoy the isolated environment that Storybook provides to create and to recreate the bug. And to add new feature, it's also perfect because you can start by writing the new API within the story, and then you can start developing. But the part where React Storybooks really shines is when it's about communications. Because we know that code is often not the real issue with our works. A lot of issues come from wrong communication between developers, between teams, or even between developers and business people, whatever. It's always a matter of communications. And actually, React Storybooks can help a lot with that. For example, here, it's me. that has proposed a new pull request for our library. And because we have this amazing tooling that allows us to deploy automatically our documentation website and our storybook, basically what I'm able to do is to link the right story into our storybook to my teammates, and then they can just click on the link and see what I just developed. So no more checkouting a branch, no more running locally your project. You can just send a link. So this is a huge gain of time. But it's also helpful with external users. So here's an example of one of our users that proposed a new feature. So what it did, it just detailed the feature, and then it linked to us the story that was concerned by the feature. So for us, it was just a matter of clicking on the link, see that the feature that he wanted, because it guided us through it, and we were done with it. It's also cool to communicate with our external contributors. So here's a guy that actually wanted to fix a bug, so he proposed his pull request, and he spotted that the story was missing. So he just added it, and again, because we can deploy the story automatically at each pull request, we were able to see it live directly. So those are examples from our experiences, but you can imagine any workflow that you want. For example, if you have some designer, you might want to share the storybook with them to let them review what you've done with your components, or create any workflow that suits your needs. Here is a little summary of everything that I just said. Basically, as you can see, you can do a lot with Storybook. You will be able to iterate quickly because you have this isolated environment when developing. You will create a whole style guide of your components. It will be a live documentation because it's code that is executed. You will also be able to expose all the behaviors of your components by letting the users play with your props. And it will be also a great way to start discussing about your components. But I'm pretty sure some of you already built some manual kitchen sink on your projects, or you may use other libraries that do pretty much the same thing. What I want you to remember here is that what's important is all that you can get from using a tool like this one. But one thing that I really like about Storybook is this. I mean, yeah, we're adopting the React Storybook, but yeah, the add-on API. Basically, is what I used for creating the specifications add-on, and this was released a couple months after releasing Storybook by the Thuret team. What it allows you to do is to add a new panel. So basically, if you think something is missing, you just have this API that will allow you to create what you need. And more importantly, to share this with the community. Because if you have a special need, there is a huge chance that other people can have the same needs than you have. So here is a small list of add-ons that already exist. There are a lot of others, but those are the most popular ones. As you can see, it's pretty diverse. You've got some add-ons that will focus more on design, some others that will more focus on documentation. But again, what I want you to remember is that if something is missing, you can create it. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy this talk. And if you have any question, you can meet me afterwards. Thanks.